in the 10 tables. Let me start with the agreements across the room. Everybody agreed that it is a major challenge to look at the future of agriculture, and everybody agreed that where we are now, we're not in a balanced state. Something needs to change. Our approach to agriculture will need to change. There was also a sense across the room that the way that farming, agriculture, land use works at the moment is still dominated by economic pressures or factors, that productivity, profitability are forces that act out stronger than social factors or environmental factors. So the balance isn't quite right. Having said all of that, though, also across the room there was an agreement that farming is part of New Zealand's cultural identity and it should stay that way. So all the suggestions that we discussed were really more about helping the people who draw their livelihood from the land and from the water. We'll get to that aspect of agriculture in the broadest sense later on. So people who draw their livelihood from agriculture, to help them to implement changes, to recognise changes, to adopt technologies, to make that transition easier. So there's no discussion about, farming being less important to New Zealand. It should remain a backbone of economy and a source of livelihood for a lot of people. So then how do you even start to change things? One thread through our discussions was really education. And in the broadest sense, so for example, within that we talked about assessments at school in STEM, to shift those away from specific tasks to more problem solution skills that people could learn at that very early stage. And within that have projects like insect-based proteins, the crickets that you've probably all heard about, the insects as a food source, as school projects, to have really early on in our education the idea that there are different ways, alternative ways of producing food. But education also touched on, and it actually picked up from what Dr. Rolleston was saying earlier, this idea that farmers don't like being told what to do, but if you give them a problem, they'll find ways of solving it. And building on that was the idea that if the focus is on changing consumer behaviour, then what the farming sector does will follow that. So if we look at how we consume food, what we think about how food is produced, and if education focuses on that, on people's understanding of that, then the farming sector will follow that demand, so demand-led change. Excuse me. Now, let me just catch up with my notes here, because I've been really scribbling it as we were discussing it. Still within that education thread, there was a discussion about anticipating problems better. And this really came from, when we were revisiting some of the revolutions that we had, Industrial Revolution, Green Revolution, Agricultural Revolution, how not so good we are about anticipating issues later on, and whether that's an area that we need to be much better about, not just waiting for a problem to occur and then recognising it as a problem and trying to fix it, but actually anticipating the long-term impacts of whatever we do, whichever way we do things. So that was more on education, but let me just sort of move on to the next aspect. And that's really concrete suggestions for change. And a lot of them were quite radical, in the best sense of the word, radical in terms of something really new. So we're not talking about tweaking agriculture as we know it. There was a lot of suggestions of doing things completely differently. And again, the crickets come to mind, the insect-based protein, plant-based proteins, synthetic meats, looking out for those emerging technologies, looking out for emerging markets as well, to think that, if, again, the consumer interest is there, should New Zealand be in a position to supply that? But also precision agriculture, this is another way of using emerging technologies to do things that we do much, much better on the environmental front. So not necessarily on increasing or maintaining productivity, but actually being better able to reduce that environmental footprint just by using technology that allows us to do things more precisely. Vertical agriculture was another aspect that we discussed, and sort of localizing demand and supply. In this context, we also looked into how to improve or how to make it easier for farmers to adopt technology faster, better, easier, to even be aware of it. So we discussed a little bit how to transfer from the research sector that is working on possible solutions to make that pathway from there straight to the people who need it on the land or at sea faster, better, and more trustworthy. So that picks up on a lot of what we discussed in the earlier talks on trust and listening and a more diverse communication that we need to have, more inclusive communication with a whole lot of people, but to also speed up that transfer of knowledge. And in that context, we talked about the role of groups like Federated Farmers, for example, of being a conduit, of making sure that the farmers have the information that they need and help them adopt new technologies easier. Now, if I could broaden the summary completely now, because this surprised me when it came up, that the definition of agriculture, we talked about it perhaps being more about land use or even about resource use, and that would include New Zealand's marine landscape, which is so much bigger than the landscape. The seascape is much larger than the landscape. So we did briefly discuss aquaculture as one of those emerging possible aspects of resource use or living off a resource, and fisheries as well. And in the context of aquaculture, one of the suggestions that came from a number of tables was to look at algae and all different aspects of using algae to use effluent that comes from land-based farms as a habitat or as a place for algae to grow, and then from there to produce different products, from compost to feed pellets, but also as a way of stripping carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that led us to discussing a more circular approach, the donut economy approach of thinking of any production and its waste products and thinking of ways of using those waste products to produce something else, making more efficient use of whatever we do and using waste products for another product, ideally in a circular way. If I had to summarize that approach, of course, we come to the term sustainability, and it's overused, but I think it is exactly what still needs to happen stronger than it is to incorporate social, environmental, and economic thinking, and on all three, make it a more sustainable approach. One of the challenges, of course, is how to finance any change, whatever change might be necessary, how to make it happen at the initial transition phase where it's likely to be costly, and costly in financial terms, in dollar terms, but also costly to some people more than others. So we talked a lot about how it's going to impact the individuals, the individual farmers, the individual people whose livelihood it is, and how it would impact the industry as a whole, given that this is an export industry and a lot of the product goes overseas. So how does all that feed back? Strong recognition of farming as a sector being very different to other industries, in the sense that there's individual farms and they operate as their own small businesses with their own challenges, with their own circumstances. Then there's this corporate structure on top of it, the different ways of then collectively bringing the product together and exporting the product. And that's a difficult one to try and implement change across the sector. So that's as, not unexpectedly, the biggest challenge of how to drive change. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but my sense was across the room that the government does have a role in that it would be asking too much to expect any level of the industry to provide the finance for that. So some form of government support, some form of subsidy, some form of grant system, scholarships, across the board, any way of encouraging a shift and an uptake of new approaches would be necessary. An aspect of that was, of course, the fact that this is a export industry, so therefore there's a strong influence from consumer behaviour elsewhere, feeding back on what is produced here, and what New Zealand's role is or chances are in foreseeing, spotting emerging markets, emerging changes in consumer behaviour elsewhere, and adjusting what we produce here. Also the concern, so that came up as a challenge, that as a specific challenge perhaps in the context of trying to reduce emissions, the idea of leakage, that if we were to produce, say, meat here at reduced emissions, what's to stop another country to produce the same product elsewhere without reducing emissions, and then you find the products competing on an international market and it might not pay back for New Zealand, and it doesn't pay back for the world either because in total emissions go up. That discussion certainly featured as one of the major challenges. Briefly, we touched on the emissions trading scheme, but I heard that from the group that there's a lot of work to be done. So that is one of the possible economic tools of providing incentives to change the way we do things. But I didn't feel that people across the table felt that this is quite good enough as it is at the moment, not quite ready to provide that tool. And if I could, perhaps, and I'm just going to scroll, there's a lot of things that I will have to add to the final document that will be circulated, because there's just so much that came from the group on both specific ideas, but also on the big picture approaches, the challenges, the difficulties of implementing change across a sector like this. But if I could finish on the call for a continued national competition to invite young leaders to keep thinking about specific ideas and to keep moving those through in a broadest collaborative approach as possible, to bring in, this pathway from the research happens here, but then there's the people who actually need the results here, and then there's the financing in the middle, and there's all the consumer changing behaviours around it, to somehow bring those views together in a form of a national competition. And I'm looking at you over there. That is a very, very big picture summary of what came across the table. So again, many thanks for all your hard work. It's been fantastic. It's very encouraging for me to see that much deep thinking going on in an area that I think over the next few years we will see significant change in both attitudes, management, practice, finance, production of whatever it is that we consume. So it's fantastic to see so much talent coming through. Thank you all very much.
That's great. And let me just say to all you young people, that is an extraordinarily difficult task to do, to be exposed to all those ideas and to consolidate it into something which is coherent. And the level of coherence of it will grow as we sit down and take the rest of the messages and put it together. And as I said, what we will do, we will circulate it back around so that when we do put out our final communique from our forum here, it will have the legitimacy of this force behind it, so that it'll be trustworthy. I'd now like to call upon Her Excellency, the Governor-General, the patron of the Eureka Trust, to make her final comments. Dame Patsy.
Thank you. I've been in this job now for just nearly 2 years, and one of the great pleasures, and I might say unexpected, but certainly wasn't one that I understood, I've thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to meet people from all around New Zealand working in such a diverse range of areas and occupations. But I think the thing I've enjoyed most of all is engaging with youth of New Zealand and hearing their ideas and seeing how their vision for New Zealand is so much more expansive than the vision we had in our generation. And I'm one of those baby boomers who is possibly unfairly accused of destroying the planet. So I'm thrilled to have been able to host this today, and it was fascinating to me listening to Veronika's summary of the points you got to. Some of you might know that David and I are plant-based eaters, and some of you might have enjoyed the food that was available for lunch. People often ask us about this, and I say, well, there are a range of reasons why we are plant-based. One of them, I guess the most important, is we really enjoy the food, as those of you who sampled it today would have seen. But I guess it also, and this is something that I took out of what Veronika said that you all touched on today, is agriculture isn't in a balanced state in not only New Zealand but the world. We are going to need to feed a much bigger population in the future, and we are going to think about the ways to do that that is more, that is sustainable, that is endurable, that will not destroy our planet. So farming is absolutely part of our culture, and I see that whenever we travel. It is in our DNA, it's what we do well in New Zealand. It's not farming, it's what we farm, and it's how we do it that is the key to the future. And yes, consumer preferences are important here, and I do think consumer interests are changing, and consumer demand-driven interest in food and food technology will change what is being farmed. And New Zealand has great natural resources, both land and sea, and we need to think creatively. You all need to think creatively, scientifically, rationally, but creatively about how we use our resources in a way that will leave a light footprint on the planet. One other thing I wanted to mention, and I hear on education. You mentioned, Veronika, problem-solving skills. Everyone pointed to this is really important. Can I also say I think communication skills are important too, because there's no point in being able to solve problems if you can't convince people first of the problem and then what the solution is. So making sure that not only do you work out the answers, but that you can engage with people effectively to explain them to others, because that trusted advisor is what you need to be. As scientists, you need to be trusted advisors. That's what Sir Peter Gluckman did so well for us, and that's what I can see Professor Juliet Gerard's going to be doing now. But it would be wonderful to think there's a room full of them in the next few years right here. So I encourage you all to stay with scientific endeavour, scientific in the widest sense, because as we all know, science is not just what I studied at school in the general science field, it's much wider. In fact, I really enjoy looking at not STEM subjects but STEAM, because I think when you add the A into STEM, the arts into STEM, you really get cooking, as it were. So I want to finish today on a congratulatory note. Celebrating the achievements of others, particularly those of young people, is something that we all enjoy and is inspirational to me. And it does give me great pleasure today to congratulate all the finalists and winners from the 2018 Sir Paul Callaghan Eureka Awards competition. I know you had the awards ceremonies last night, but I want to add my congratulations and say well done to all of you. I hear from the judges that the competition this year was particularly strong, and you should all feel very proud of what you've achieved. And my final special duty is to present the trophy to the Premier Award winner. And as is the tradition, I'd like the last year's winner, Neakere Kiwi, to come and assist me in that in the presentation of the trophy. Is Neakere? There you are over there. And while Neakere's coming up, could I ask George Mander, the winner of the Premier Award, to come forward? So good luck to all of the forum participants from today in your science studies. I'm really looking forward to see how you shape an environmentally sustainable and prosperous future for our country and for the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Patsy. And I'd like to express the appreciations of Eureka to you and Sir David for hosting this event today. And in fact, I think we can attribute that you are the initiator of this event, because it was your idea that we should hold this forum rather than just a static dinner where we all just enjoyed ourselves. So having to work for your lunch, you can thank Dame Patsy for that. But I think the long-term benefits would be much greater. So we would thank you and Government House and your staff for putting on this event today. And based on the feedback that I've been getting, we'll probably be approaching you again next year about a repeat.
We'd be delighted.
Great, thanks very much. Their Excellencies will now be departing, but we'd like the winners and the scholarship, all of the finalists and the scholarship winners to go out of the room with them, because they're going to be doing a staircase shot outside. So can you just please stand and applaud the winners for the last time? If the finalists can all, and scholarship winners can also leave the room, please. Thank you, everyone. You can sit down for just a couple of minutes now. I want to also take this opportunity to thank the people who have done all of the work behind the scenes here, and where's Leslie? Leslie, I think you deserve a round of applause. You're the one who've had to take all the... And I want to thank all of the participants, particularly the schools who've come from around the Wellington region to participate in this event. I hope that it's been productive for you, and you will take some learnings from this that will be useful to you in making future decisions. And if you elect to take a head off in the science area, you've got a much better context for understanding how science works and the web of intrigue which sits around it and how you can navigate through it. All of our other participants, thank you for coming along. We will be sending around a questionnaire, and in addition to the updated report, we will be seeking feedback. This was our first time putting this on, and like everything else, we look for continuous improvement. So we would like to get your feedback on what worked well, what didn't work well, and what you might suggest we do better in the future. So like good scientists, we're receptive and open to ideas, and we'll work on finding innovative ways to fix them. So that's the last of mine. I just want to say that actually all of the finalists have gone out, Francis, so I can't tell them that you've got a T-shirt for them. You better take the... He's done it already. So finally, for me, anyone who requires a taxi to get to the airport, you're free now to go. The taxi host is out here. They'll help get you into taxis and on your way. So that is the end of it. Thank you very much, everyone. A most enjoyable event, and I hope you have found it a fantastic learning experience. Thank you very much.